Hello students, welcome to the Analyst, dated 2nd of August 2023. Today we look at 5 important articles from the Indian Express and the Hindu, and the handout of the same session is attached in the description. Now the first article will be the right to marry. Then we look at sub-categorization of OBCs. Then we look at Delhi Services Bill. Finally, we look at 2 prelims related articles. One is carbon storage, carbon capture, and then the PM Swanidhi scheme related to loans for street vendors. Now, when we are looking at the first article, the right to marry, it pertains to your GS2, right? Now, why this is in news? Because leaders from all the sides of the aisle, whether they are from the ruling party or the opposition, they were debating bringing a bill which would require parental consent in love marriages. Now, the issue is that a marriage is solemnized between 2 people, right? Between 2 consenting adults. Now, the idea is that given that it is a love marriage, so there should be some institutional agreement. That means the family should agree to any love marriage. Why? Because love marriage is between 2 adults only and the family is usually not involved. Now, based upon this, we must analyze whether we have the right to marry or not. Now, what do we mean by marriage? So in India, a marriage can be a social contract. It can be a contractual obligation. It can be a sacrament. It can be a sacrament when we are looking at the Hindu laws, when we are solemnizing a Hindu marriage. And it can be a social contract when we are looking at the Mohammedan law. Then we must also look at consent. Now, the consent must be between 2 adults and the consent must be free consent. It must be free of any coercion, any ill will, any kind of force. Then the marriage must be solemnized in accordance with the law, right? Now, the issue of marriage somewhere intersects with our fundamental rights. And to say so, our Article 19, your freedoms of speech and expression, and Article 21. When we are looking at life and personal liberty. Now we know that Article 19(1)(a) to G, it is a gamut of rights. So there are multiple rights. Similarly, under 19(2), you have reasonable restrictions. And under 21, you have life plus liberty. Now, let's look at what the court said in Common Cause versus Union of India, a case of 2005. So, our autonomy as persons is founded on the ability to decide. That means there is free will to decide what? To decide what we wear. Is it not a freedom of speech and expression? The way I dress, the colors I choose, the kind of clothes I am wearing. Now, that doesn't mean these are unbound rights. There are reasonable restrictions naturally. Then, I can naturally, if I want to eat something, I can consume it. Then, if I want to speak, that is your 19(1)(a), right? Your speech. Then the right to believe or not to believe. So I can be agnostic, I can be a believer, I can be extremely religious, right? So your Article 25, to profess, practice and propagate, to have a conscience, and to also not have a conscience, naturally. Then to whom to love and to partner. So these are the basic rights. These are the basic charter of rights that we can see that any human is born with, right? So each individual will have protected entitlement in determining the choice of partner to share intimacies within or outside marriage. That means even if I'm not getting married, can I have a relationship with a person? And can I share some intimacies? Yes, the answer is yes. Is it part of my autonomy? Is it part of my privacy? Absolutely yes. Then the constitution exists for believers as well as agnostics. So it is immaterial of whatever my belief system is. if I love someone, if I have feelings for someone, naturally I will have my rights protected, and I can share my intimacies with a person if there is free consent. Then the constitution protects the ability of each individual to pursue a way of life or faith in which he or she seeks to adhere. So these rights, when they are talking about these rights, they are extremely expansive. They are giving more liberties. Now, a case of interstate marriage came before the Supreme Court in Lata Singh versus State of UP. Here, what happened is that Supreme Court lamented that when we are going for interfaith or intercaste marriages, it is also leading to more amity, more cohesion, and more sharing of belief systems. So it is in national interest to protect such marriages. And the court ordered stern action against all those who are threatening or carrying out threats against the couple. So what happens is that we are witnessing a lot of crimes. Let's say our parents are not happy, or the society is not happy, or our caste group is not happy with a marriage. Then can they adhere to violence? Can they go to any extent to stop the marriage? So the answer is absolutely no. Why? Because there is no authority of law. There is no authority with a third person. So the marriage is between two people. So even if you are family, you cannot go for hate crimes. You cannot take the law in your own hand, right? Then similar conditions happened in Khap Panchayat case of 2014. Here the court observed that no third party has a right to interfere between two consenting adults who are going for marriage. And the court said that when two people get into a wedlock, no one should intervene, neither parents, society, Khap or Panchayat. So what started with common cause, and in Lata Singh, there was explicit mention of right to marry under Article 21. It was further clearly outlined that no third person is there to intervene in a marriage. These rights became further expansive in 2017 because of your right to privacy judgment, basically the J. Puttaswamy versus Union of India judgment. So here it says that privacy, one component of privacy is privacy of choice. So it talked at length on the idea of choice. So the privacy of choice, which protects an individual's autonomy over fundamental personal choices. So to whom to marry, and if that person is agreeing to the marriage, is my fundamental personal choice. And nobody in the society should intervene unless it is an unlawful act itself, right? Then privacy includes at its core the preservation of personal intimacies, the sanctity of family life, marriage, procreation, the home and sexual orientation. So more reading of rights, more liberties in terms of your right to marry. Now in Shafi Jahan versus Ashokan KM, what happened is that it is a case where it is about religious conversion also, and about marriage also. So the father of Hadia, this is famously called as Hadia case. So the father of Hadia, he went to the High Court filing a habeas corpus petition to bring back her daughter. Why? Because daughter had converted to a different religion and then married. So the court said that Hadia has been coerced to first convert and then to marry. However, Supreme Court ruled against this judgment of the High Court, and it held that the right to marry a person of one's choice is integral to Article 21. And if the person is of normal state of mind and then having free consent, so that person can also convert into a religion and can also marry a person of his or her choice, right? So the choice of a partner, whether within or outside marriage, lies within the exclusive domain of each individual. Again, the ideas of individuality, the ideas of privacy was talked about, because this is post the Puttaswamy judgment. Then intimacies of marriage lie within the core zone of privacy. So what did we get from J. Puttaswamy? We got the right to privacy. So your marriage is now in the core zone of privacy, which is inviolable. That means you cannot be, this right cannot be taken away. Then a person's right to choose a religion, this is the first aspect, and marry is an intrinsic part of their meaningful existence. Again, when we are talking about meaningful existence, we are talking about Article 21. Neither the state nor the patriarchal supremacy. That means, again, no third party can absolve a marriage, can void a marriage, unless and until the two consenting adults, if they are willing, then no third party can come in between the marriage. Now, we look at the sub-categorization of OBCs, and this pertains to your GS2. Now, what is the context? That recently Justice Rohini Commission, they have given the report to the President. Now, this commission was created under Article 340 in 2017. Why? Because it was said that the representation of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in terms of reservation, whether it is in jobs or it is about your education, this is proportional to the population. However, when we are looking at the OBC reservation, so two particular trends were visible. One, that majority of the benefits of reservation, which is a type of affirmative action, is being taken away by few dominant caste. Second issue is about the proportion. Why? Because in accordance with 1931 data, we had approximately 52% of OBC population. And in 1931, what happened is that we were not divided. We were not divided into India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. So cumulatively, we had 27 crore of population. So out of this 27 crore of population, 52% of the people were other backward caste. And based upon this data, this caste census data of 1931, we had the Mandal Commission. We have the Mandal Commission. And then Mandal Commission's recommendation were agreed upon to give 27% reservation to the OBC, the other backward castes. Now, what is the issue? The issue is that when we look at the takeaways of Justice Rohini Commission, we see that primarily 97% of the jobs in last 5 years and the seats of OBCs in top institutions is being taken away by 25% of the population. That means there is inequality of representation. It is not equitable. Then 25% of these jobs and seats are taken away by only 10 castes. And we have more than 2600 castes. So if 10 castes are alone taking 25% of these seats, then it is again not fair representation. Furthermore, 983 OBC communities were found to have zero representation, and this comprises of 37%. So 37% of the people is having 0% representation. So these are the issues. Now, what do we mean by sub-categorization? So the idea is that, let's say I have given reservation. Let's say scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, OBCs, then EWS, right? So you have gone for various types of reservation. But what happens is within this individual block, there is unfair representation. So now the idea is that if I can go for individual allocation to different caste groups, then all the caste groups will be fairly represented. Right now the condition is that the dominant castes are able to take up the majority of these seats. Now we'll go for subcategorization, means breaking the 27% maybe into smaller parts, and these smaller parts will be allocated based upon some socio-economic indicators. Now we are also looking at the limitations. When we are discussing the subcategorization, we are talking about equitability, right? We are going for more equity. But what are the limitations? So the limitations is that we are still working on 1931 data. Second limitation is that we still are not talking of another caste census. Why? Because it was delayed in 2021. Furthermore, we have not released the caste data of SECC 2011, right? Then we are also looking at faulty data. How come? So when we are looking at 2600 caste, we are seeing a repetition of keywords, a repetition of names. Then a single caste is finding its place in multiple subcategorizations. So such data errors is also visible in our data. And therefore, what is the way forward? So the report is yet to come in public. However, post the report, there must be also a timeline of how we can calculate the caste data so as to make it more equitable in terms of subcategorization within caste. Why? Because in the Ram Singh case, the Supreme Court held that we have to move beyond the purviews of caste alone. So caste is one of the determinant, but we also have to look at socio-economic, educational parameters. And these parameters along with data can be used to give better targeted affirmative actions. And when we are talking about affirmative action, we are not only referring to the reservation per se. We are also looking at allocation of subsidies, allocation of economic resources, allocation of funds in various policies. Let's say the Awas Yojana, or let's say giving out some direct benefit transfers for support of, let's say, farmers, or for support of rural people in general. So if we are looking at a universal basic income, if we are looking at, let's say, a partial basic income, so any such policy, whenever we are talking about distribution of subsidies, distribution of economic resources, redistribution of wealth, redistribution of land resources, so we should have better data and better targeting, right? So the third article pertains to a bill which is replacing the ordinance, and this pertains to your Union Territory of Delhi. Now, we know that Delhi has a special status. So, it is a Union Territory with a legislature. And we have earlier also seen that it is governed under Article 239 AA. Right? So when we are talking about 239 AA, what kind of structure do we have? So we have a Council of Minister, and the Council of Minister is headed by a CM. Then we have an administrator in Delhi called the Lieutenant Governor. Now, over the period of time, due to the tussle between the elected government and the LG is appointed by the President. So given that Delhi has a unique model, there is a continuous tussle. There is a continuous tussle between the Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister and the LG on the other side. Now this has gone to courts, and through a catena of judgments, time and again it has been ruled in the favor of the Chief Minister and Council of Ministers. However, What has happened is that one aspect was left from the 2018 judgment. So in 2018 judgment, the issue of services was not settled. What do I mean by services? So any government officer who is working in Delhi, so that issue was not settled, that who is prima facie in control of the services, who will control the bureaucracy. So in 2013, in Government of NCT of Delhi versus Union of India, it was determined by the Supreme Court that the Council of Ministers headed by the Chief Minister will basically head the services. And it talked about the triple chain of collective responsibility. And what do I mean by triple chain of collective responsibility? That means the Chief Minister is responsible to the legislature, and the entire legislature is responsible to the people in general. Now, let's say there is a minister, and that minister has given 5 promises. So, these promises will be fulfilled through executive action only. But what if the executive themselves is not under the control of the chief minister? What actual power would the chief minister and the council of ministers wield if the officers is reporting to a different authority? So what happened is that lieutenant governor and officers, they started communicating directly, and therefore the chief minister lost the executive powers. And the executive powers to, let's say, issue orders or to get a policy executed. So this was challenged in the court, and therefore the court came out with its ruling. Now, the court says that a constitutionally entrenched and democratically elected government needs to have control over the administration. Now, when we are talking about the division of power, then we must look at Schedule 7. And under Schedule 7, we have the state list, we have the concurrent list, and we have the union list. So services come under the state list. That means the executive must be in control of services, and this comes under 41. Your listing 41, your entry 41. So under 41 there is services. So in Delhi, except for public order, police and land, all the other powers are vested with the chief minister and the council of ministers. And assuming that the lieutenant governor will work with the aid and advice of the council of ministers. The main tussle is whether the LG can take suo motu decisions, or the LG will have to abide by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So this ruling clearly laid down that according to Article 239A, the LG is bound to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers of NCTD in relation to matters within the legislative scope. When we are talking about legislative scope, we are talking about coextensive powers. What kind of powers? Coextensive. That means, let's say the legislature has powers over 100 topics. Okay. So the executive powers will also be over these 100 topics. Coextensive. That means on similar subjects, they will have similar powers. However, this was nullified. This judgment was instantaneously nullified through an ordinance. Now, what is an ordinance? It is basically under Article 123. Article 123 gives the power to the President to bring an ordinance, to promulgate an ordinance when during recess of Parliament, when both the houses is in recess or either of the houses is in recess. Now the maximum duration of an ordinance can be 6 weeks plus 6 months. Why 6 months? Because in between 2 sessions of the Parliament, the maximum gap can be 6 months. Furthermore, the ruling of R.C. Cooper versus Union of India and D.C. Wadhwa versus Union of India has clearly restricted the misuse or abuse of ordinance power. So what used to happen is that whenever a political party is looking at the legislative let's say numbers, they are foreseeing that their bill will not go through. Let's say I am very sure that my bill will go through the Lok Sabha, but it will not go through the Raj Sabha. So what I would do is bring an ordinance for the time being, and this can last for 6 months, let's say, and then I will again bring another ordinance. So this way, some cheating was happening, some misuse was happening using the ordinance route. And it must be appreciated that ordinance has the same power as a statute. That means it has the same legal power of an act. So the R.C. Cooper and D.C. Wadhwa ruling, they stopped the misuse of ordinance. Furthermore, the ordinance in this particular case, it completely nullified the judgment of 2023 by creating the National Capital Civil Services Authority. Now, this was the biggest bone of contention. Why? Because here there was the Chief Minister, plus there was the Home Secretary, plus there was the Chief Secretary. So a 3-membered body would recommend names for transfer, posting, vigilance, etc. to the LG. Right? Now, this particular body had a quorum of 2. That means even if the Chief Minister is not present, then the Home Secretary and the Chief Secretary, they can cumulatively decide and pass orders. Right? Furthermore, if this is the case, then the intentions of, let's say, transferring a particular official or having control over the officials in general would not be with the CM, effectively not be with the CM, right? So this authority has now been created under the ordinance. But now we are bringing a bill to replace this ordinance. The bill is yet to be passed, but the bill has certain smaller modifications because it has deleted section 3A. Section 3A of the ordinance was extremely contentious. Why? Because 3A said that there shall be no judicial review of this particular act. There shall be no judicial intervention in this particular act. And this was essentially made, this ordinance was essentially made to nullify the judgment, the constitutional judgment of a Supreme Court. And therefore, when the bill has been brought, the section 3A has been dropped. However, most of the provisions are same. Now, we are looking at carbon capture, storage, and how it can stop emissions. So, briefly looking at the diagram, we can understand that, let's say this is a source of carbon. So we are getting some carbon out of fossil fuels naturally, because this power plant will run on fossil fuels. But the emissions, the point emissions, they can be directly transferred to caverns, to underground spaces, so that it is not emitted in the atmosphere, right? Now, when we are looking at carbon capture, it involves 3 steps. One is capture, the other is utilization, the third is storage. Another component can be your transportation. And the biggest issue in carbon capture is the transportation. So when we are looking at capture of carbon, we are essentially targeting climate change. We are essentially targeting air pollution. We are essentially targeting the naturalization of air. And these technologies have become more vocal in context of our Paris Agreement. So post Paris 2015, we are looking at various technological solutions as well as other solutions to combat and mitigate the effects of climate change. So first we'll capture. To capture from where? From large sources, from point sources. Like, let's say there is a automobile factory, let's say there is a power plant. So all those sectors which are extremely pollutant. Then utilization. So can we create a byproduct which can be used in the industries, or can it be used in, let's say, manufacture of some secondary elements? So that is utilization. Then comes the issue of transportation. Transportation from the source, that means let's say this is the factory, and to the cavern. So this is usually a costly process. Then the issue of storage. Now storage, when we are talking about, so we are only talking about, let's say, deep caverns. So let's say there is a depleted oil well or gas well, or there is a saline reservoir. So we can store and tap the carbon there. Now what are the benefits? So we are reducing greenhouse gases, we are mitigating climate change, we are improving air quality, then we are also looking at reducing the health problems. Furthermore, we are also creating what is called as green jobs. And we are investing in the clean economy. So the carbon intensive economy that we have today, we are moving towards less carbon economy, because we have targets of net zero by 2050, and India has taken up the pledge of net zero by 2070. So we have to move, and we have to create a clean energy sector. So that will help. Then it will also help in sustainable usage of fossil fuels. Why? Because when you are looking at carbon capture, carbon storage, carbon tax, etc., then what happens is the cost of using carbon that increases. And naturally, then any industry or any particular sector which is carbon intensive, they'll be investing more and they'll be wasting less, right? But what are the challenges? So the primary challenge is cost, because there is less technology diffusion in this sector, there is lack of technology maturity, and therefore the cost is extremely high. So we can call this as a capital intensive industry. Then the availability of storage. And what if, let's say, there is a natural hazard, a disaster, and that triggers the leakage of these carbon sites, the carbon storage sites. Furthermore, there is lack of clarity in terms of government also, in terms of public also in general, of such methods. Why? Because everyone is fearful of what negative impacts it can create in their own locality, right? Then we are looking at the PM Swanidhi scheme. So when we are talking about Swanidhi, we are essentially talking about street vendors. So in India, we have 50 lakh street vendors. And the biggest shock that they received was during 2020 COVID. Why? Because of the lockdowns and the quarantine measures, they were not able to sell, and therefore they depend on daily incomes. Also, more than 80% of these street vendors, they are migrants. So they are coming from regions of poverty, from our aspirational districts, and they are mostly coming to the cities. Now, what is PM Swanidhi? So it is basically looking at benefiting these street vendors, and it is run by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So the idea is to give 10,000 rupees loan, then 20,000 rupee loan, then 50,000 rupee loan. So if I get a 10,000 rupee loan and I repay it in time, then I'll be eligible for a 20,000 loan, and further to a 50,000 loan. And this is nothing but microcredit. With such microcredit, I will be able to sustain myself and I'll be able to invest in my business. Furthermore, if I am a continuous payer of the interest, if I'm not defaulting, then what will happen? I will also get a subsidy on our interest rate, which will be transferred back to my bank account. Now, what are the benefits? So when we are looking at these urban regions, we are also looking at issues of urban poverty. So urban poverty alleviation. Then we are also looking at urban job creation. Furthermore, we are also looking at increased digital payments, and we are also looking at formalization of economy. Then we are looking at these jobs for potential migrants. Thank you so much. I hope it helped.